Russia holds its annual Victory Day parade to mark the 80th anniversary of its defeat of Nazi Germany.
At least 5 civilians were killed following an intense exchange of fire between Indian and Pakistani soldiers in Kashmir.
China's April trade data shows exports to the US fell sharply, though overall exports rose over 8%, driven by exports to other nations.
Shortly after Robert Francis Prevost made his first public appearance on the Vatican balcony on Thursday, leaders around the world congratulated the new pope. The pontificate of Prevost, who goes by the name Leo XIV, appears to be one of peace and hope, which he emphasized several times in his opening address. This sentiment was mirrored in many of the congratulatory messages from world leaders. Many emphasize Pope Leo's election comes at a time marked by conflict and unrest and hope his leadership can result in unity, peace, and compassion. During his opening address, the Pope had called for a disarmed and disarming peace. Speaking to Euronews, President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, said that this message was mostly a moral one and not necessarily politically tangible.
Dans ce monde idéal, on n'aurait pas besoin des armes parce qu'on n'aurait pas de menaces. Malheureusement, dans la vie qu'on a, il y a des menaces. Il faut la défense. Et ce qu'on a appris, c'est que la paix sans défense, c'est une illusion.
Pope Leo XIV shares late Pope Francis's commitment to helping the poor and migrants, with his papal name reflecting his dedication to social justice. The pontiff, a moderate leader with progressive stances, is therefore seen as a potential bridge between tradition and modernity.
Russia marked the 80th anniversary of its defeat of Nazi Germany with an enormous military parade in Moscow. The event is seen as a show of force of Russia on the international stage. Foreign leaders, including China's Xi Jinping and Brazil's Lula da Silva, joined President Vladimir Putin in the Russian capital, as well as Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico. Speaking at the parade, Putin hailed Russian troops fighting in Ukraine.
Россия была и будет несокрушимой преградой для нацизма, русофобии, антисемитизма. Будет бороться с бесчинствами, что творят поборники этих агрессивных, разрушительных идей. Правда и справедливость на нашей стороне. Вся страна, общество, народ поддерживают участников специальной военной операции. Мы гордимся их смелостью и решительностью, той силой духа, которая всегда приносила нам только победу.
Serbia's President Alexander Vučić made his first trip to Russia since the invasion on Wednesday, despite the EU's message that visiting Moscow could derail Serbia's ambitions to join the bloc.
Denmark has summoned the acting U.S. ambassador in the country for explanations, following a report saying the U.S. is stepping up intelligence gathering efforts regarding Greenland. The report, published by the Wall Street Journal, said several high-ranking intelligence officials had directed intelligence agency heads to learn more about Greenland's independence movement and sentiment about U.S. resource extraction there.
Jeg har godt læst en artikel i Wall Street Journal, og den bekymrer mig meget, fordi vi spionerer ikke mellem venner. Og jeg kan jo ikke vide, om det sker, fordi det står i en avis. Men det virker jo ikke særlig stærkt gendrevet af dem, der udtaler sig. Og det bekymrer mig.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen echoed the foreign minister's concerns on Friday, saying you cannot spy against an ally. Last month, she said U.S. statements about annexing the island were disrespectful and insisted the territory was not up for sale. The Security Service of Ukraine announced on Friday that it exposed a suspected Hungarian military intelligence network. It said in a statement that it was the first time in Ukraine's modern history that foreign espionage activities from an EU country were discovered. Hungary's foreign minister responded to the allegations, calling the claims Ukrainian propaganda.
Ukrajnában gyakran alkalmaznak magyar ellenes propagandát. Olyan magyar ellenes propagandát, amelyről sok esetben kiderült, hogy semmifajta alapja nincsen. Úgyhogy ezért én arra kérek mindenkit, hogy minden ilyen ukrán propagandában megjelenő hírrel szemben tanúsítson óvatosságot. És majd, hogyha kapunk bármilyen részletet vagy hivatalos információt, majd akkor tudunk ezzel foglalkozni, mindaddig ezt egy óvatossággal kezelendő propagandának kell minősítenem.
Two suspects, both former members of the Ukrainian military, have been detained and face charges of treason. They're accused of collecting information on Ukrainian forces in the Zakarpattia region, searching for vulnerabilities in defense systems and studying the socio-political views of local residents.
Pope Leo XIV celebrated his first Mass as pontiff in the Sistine Chapel on Friday morning, joined by the cardinal electors. Former Cardinal Robert Prevost, he wore black shoes and a pastoral cross, which Popes Benedict and Francis used. Beginning his homily in English, the new Pope said, "You have called me to carry a cross." He spoke of the marvels the Lord has done and his reliance on cardinals to walk with him in announcing the gospel.
My brother cardinals, as we celebrate this morning, I invite you to recognize the marvels that the Lord has done, the blessings that the Lord continues to pour out upon all of us.
Pope Leo reflected on how the world often dismisses Jesus or rejects him when his moral demands become inconvenient. Quoting Pope Francis, he emphasized the call to bear witness to joyful faith in Jesus, the Savior. He concluded that a key commitment for church authority is to disappear so that Christ may remain. Pope Leo ended his first homily with a prayer for grace through the intercession of Mary. China's April trade data shows exports to the US fell sharply, though overall exports rose over 8%, driven by export to other nations. The figures suggest President Donald Trump's tariffs are accelerating a global supply chain shift away from China. Shipments to the US plunged 21% in April due to American tariffs, and China's imports from the US also dropped. US and Chinese officials meet in Geneva on Saturday, but analysts doubt a full tariff rollback and predict a further drop in China's US-bound exports. The supply chain restructuring sped up by the pandemic and trade barriers has seen manufacturers diversify away from China. While the US remains a key market, the EU and Southeast Asia are China's larger regional export destinations. In the first 4 months of this year, exports to ASEAN, Latin America, India and Africa also strong double-digit growth. The data comes as Beijing announced measures earlier this week to support its own economy, which faces challenges in the housing and banking sectors.
At least 5 civilians were killed following an intense exchange of fire between Indian and Pakistani soldiers along the line of control that divides Kashmir. Indian military officials said they responded after Pakistani troops barraged their posts overnight. People in border towns said the firing continued well into Friday morning. 4 civilians were killed in Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. On the Indian side of the border, a woman was killed and 2 other civilians were injured, according to police. Tensions have soared since a tourist site in India-controlled Kashmir was attacked by militants, killing 26 people. On Wednesday, India conducted airstrikes on several sites in Pakistani territory, which Pakistan vowed to respond to. The crisis has disrupted daily life for people in both India and Pakistan, with schools being shut and flight operations suspended in border regions.
The Irish Prime Minister Micheál Martin has described Gaza as hell on earth and criticized the EU's lack of response to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and reiterated calls to reopen the EU-Israel Association Agreement. The Prime Minister met with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to discuss this as well as the ongoing trade war with the US. Speaking with Euronews, he said Ireland condemns Hamas terrorism and wants all the hostages kidnapped by Hamas released, but says Israel's war has lost its moral compass.
It's quite shocking what is now happening within Gaza. To have an effective blockade for 50 days and more, 60 days maybe now, in terms of food, in terms of the essentials of life, the bare necessities of life, in my view, must be considered a war crime. And I don't say that easily. I want a resolution. We want a restoration of the ceasefire. We want the release of all hostages.
Israel launched its war in Gaza in response to the Hamas attack on October 7th of 2023.
In my view, it was shocking to take people as hostages. These were innocent people at a concert in their kibbutz. I went to kibbutz Be'eri myself to see it firsthand, the impact of the horrific Hamas attack on Israel. And that was shocking and horrible. And I've condemned it from the outset, and I went there to show empathy with the people who had been attacked. So all those, the hostages should have been released a long time ago. But the war that has been waged in response, in my view, has lost any moral compass at this stage in terms of its unacceptable impact on the civilian population and on children.
Israel described in the past the Irish policy as extreme anti-Israeli. You can watch the whole interview next Tuesday on the Europe Conversation.